Rewind to when it looked like salvation, when one weapon seemed to fix a fear no budget could ignore. The birth of a miracle machine. The late Cold War felt like a clock running down. Soviet submarines, bomber patrols, and surface groups pressed at the edges of the map. Blue water dominance wasn't an assumption, it was a question. Inside conference rooms, the charts always ended the same way. We didn't have enough hulls to be everywhere we needed to be. The promise on the table was seductive. Build a ship that did the work of many, a leap ahead so decisive it would reset the calculus. Contractors arrived with storyboards and models. Stealth angles, electric power, integrated sensors, guns that would reach far inland. They said it would be cheaper than building more ships the old way, fewer crews, more capability, a force multiplier. Get this, they actually thought they could collapse missions into a single platform and cut costs doing it. In hearings, those slides looked like victory drawn in graphite and blue light. Meanwhile, across town, Congressional staffers ran a different math. The shipyard stamps were already spread across multiple states. Composite panels here, radar arrays there, final integration somewhere blessed with a swing vote. Patriotic branding did the rest. Next generation deterrence, dominance, jobs. The message played well on local radio. The photos of hard hats at the keel laying played even better. Inside the Navy, doubts whispered between program managers and captains who'd seen too many miracles turn into maintenance. A few memos flagged the risk. You can't shove a dozen new technologies into one hull without breaking schedules and budgets. But urgent timelines drowned caution. The pitch carried a simple ultimatum. If you don't commit now, you'll fall behind. And the clock said commit. The early specs were a dream. A stealthy silhouette that cut radar returns to a fraction. A power plant that could turn megawatts into weapons. A pair of advanced guns that would drop precision shells from the horizon into enemy artillery positions. A sensor suite that stitched sea and sky into one picture everyone could fight from. It was elegant. It was impossible to hate. What nobody knew at the time, because it wasn't in the glossy books, was how brittle the assumptions were. Precision shells required a supply chain that didn't yet exist. Integration demanded software that had to connect systems nobody had married before. And survivability depended on a threat environment holding still long enough for the ship to catch up. The ocean, of course, never holds still. While that was happening in the hearing rooms, a separate conversation unfolded in district offices. Letters from prime contractors outlined the subcontractors waiting to hire. Governors toured factories. Editorial boards ran op-eds about American engineering and the ship that would anchor a generation of skilled work. The idea hardened into a fact. Canceling would be a betrayal of both security and livelihoods. In the Navy's program office, the moment of no return had a specific feel. The multi-year, multi-ship contract with long lead items funded across fiscal years. Vendors ordered specialized materials. Unique tooling was cut. Universities spun up training. Every dollar sunk became part of the argument to sink more. Schedules locked in, and with them, careers. There was a single meeting, recounted years later, where a senior officer asked a blunt question. What happens if the gun ammunition costs too much? The answer came wrapped in certainty. Economies of scale, supplier competition, incremental improvements. It sounded reasonable. It also assumed the buy would stay big enough to drive the price down. That assumption would break first. 3 decisions sealed the deal. 1. Distribute work across politically sensitive states to guarantee protection. 2. Commit to an unprecedented integration of new tech, radar, power, guns, software, so the ship looked irreplaceable. 3. Market it as a solution to both strategy and industrial decline. If you opposed the program, you weren't just against a ship. You were against jobs, deterrence, and the future. The day funding locked in, nothing changed on the waterfront. Welders still checked seams. Engineers still chased bugs. But on paper, the program gained mass. It became its own gravity well. Critics could still file pointed questions, but their words now bounced off the shield of sunk costs and patriotic framing. The hull number had a constituency. Then the first cracks appeared almost immediately. Lab tests ran hot. Software integrations slipped. The guns, bespoke ammunition, didn't hit cost targets and started creeping up the way bespoke things do when volume falls. Meanwhile, the promised, cheaper than more hulls line became harder to say with a straight face as invoices arrived for unique parts no other ship needed. What they didn't know then was how quickly the strategic map would tilt. Precision missiles and surveillance would make the ocean smaller for big targets. But that realization lived in a different chapter. In this one, the miracle machine still glowed on slides and christening speeches. It still meant the district kept its shifts and the Navy kept its promise to leap forward. This was the moment everything changed, not because of a test or a failure, but because the web was now woven. Contracts, jobs, allied expectations, pride. The program couldn't be just a program anymore. It was a narrative, and narratives are harder to unwind than budgets. The ship had to sail. The price had to be paid. And everyone told themselves the fix was just one milestone away. Trials that told the truth. The first sea trials were supposed to be a formality, a set of boxes to check on the way to initial operating capability. Instead, engineers started keeping two lists, problems to fix and problems to explain away. Out in blue water, the new power system hummed like a cathedral organ, until it didn't. Voltage transients tripped safeties. The ship would shrug, then blink, then ask for a reboot at the worst possible time. Nobody wanted to call it what it was. A reliability risk you couldn't brief away. Stakes were human before they were technical. A crew that trained to fight now trained to babysit. Watchstanders learn the rhythms of software crashes the way older sailors learn the weather. A diagnostic screen would freeze, a worker-owned checklist would appear, a petty officer would mutter, "Again." What mattered was simple. If the lights went dim in a fight, sailors didn't get a second try. Every hiccup carried that weight. Wargames tried to give the miracle machine an honest day in court. On a classified floor with maps taped to the wall, red teams didn't play fair. They jammed. They spoofed. They flooded the air with decoys and cheap drones. The touted advantage, stealth, sensors, the long arm of those advanced guns, kept getting turned sideways by tactics that cost pennies compared to what sat in the water. Controllers quietly adjusted scenarios to focus on blue capabilities. The score still came back ugly. Meanwhile, something else was happening back in the integration lab. The elegant picture where every sensor talked to every weapon started to look like a crowded dinner table where nobody listened. Data latency crept in, tracks duplicated. The fusion engine misranked targets in clutter. Engineers built bridges of code over canyons of incompatibility, and each bridge added weight. It worked in tests until a patch elsewhere broke it again. The system was becoming a Rube Goldberg machine with rank and a hull number. A memo circulated with the antiseptic phrasing of bad news, not survivable under modern targeting. It was written carefully, the way people write when they know their careers might be attached to the wrong adjective. The response was a meeting, then a slide, then a new plan, operate with escorts, with air cover, with deception. In short, wrap the miracle in conventional protection and call it doctrine. The workaround became the concept of operations. The concept became the alibi. Costs didn't just climb, they rearranged themselves. Money flowed not to fix the flaw, but to sustain the dream. Spare parts stockpiles grew because proprietary components failed in ways the models hadn't predicted. Specialized technicians rode flights out to meet the ship because the knowledge lived with the vendors, not the fleet. Training hours ballooned as crews learned sequences to coax temperamental subsystems into alignment. The budget line thickened, and the promise of cheaper than more hulls turned into a punchline told quietly. One micro-story stuck. A pre-deployment workup required the guns to demonstrate a live fire sequence with the precision shells. Weather was perfect. Range was clear. The crew prepped like it mattered because it did. Then procurement called. The ammo lot was delayed. The price had jumped. The test would be simulated. The captain stood on the bridge wing and watched a ship built around a weapon that couldn't be used for the purpose it was built. "We'll run the script," he told his XO. They did. The report read, satisfactory. Across town, Oversight staffers asked why the wargame metrics looked better each quarter. The answer was a new test plan. Instead of stressing the system where it tended to fail, under saturation, under jamming, under uncertainty. The evaluations validated what worked. Single threat tracks, clear comms, perfect weather. Managed metrics, one analyst called it. The phrase never reached daylight, but it lived in the hallways where numbers got polished before they went to the hill. On the waterfront, sailors adapted. They cannibalized parts from one Pier Queen to keep another ship on schedule, long before anyone used the word cannibalization in a brief. They swapped hard drives and whispered which software build crashed least under Sea State 5. They invented rituals: restart this first, wait exactly 90 seconds, then bring up that bus, because rituals saved time when manuals didn't. Readiness on paper held. In hearts and heads, confidence slid. What nobody knew at the time, because the clearances were tight and the annexes were thick, was how efficiently adversaries were watching. They saw the repurposing. They read the trade press. They trained against the silhouette and the habits that followed it. In their sims, the miracle ship stayed outside certain threat rings and never pressed the beach to fire guns it no longer could afford to fire. The advantage was theoretical. The counters were practical. This was the moment everything changed again. The trials told the truth. The truth was inconvenient, so the program learned to interpret, to stage, to buffer the raw edges of performance with narrative. That's not a conspiracy, it's a survival tactic. And it worked, because the checks kept clearing, the press releases kept flowing, and the ship kept sailing. Not to the mission it was born for, but to the one politics could sustain. The iron triangle forms. While trials were grinding through excuses, a different machine was running smoothly in Washington. It didn't depend on software builds or sea state. It ran on calendars, receptions, and the quiet math of committee chairs. The contractor, the Hill, and the Navy's program office found a shared language: continuity. Stakes first. If the program faltered, factories would go dim. Thousands of skilled jobs, welders, machinists, coders, would feel the hit before any admiral did. Districts would lose paychecks, governors would field cameras, headlines would say abandoning American leadership. The message didn't have to be said out loud. Vote to protect the platform, protect the people. It worked because it was partly true. Action followed. Manufacturing didn't just happen where it made sense. It happened where it made votes. Composite houses in one state, power conversion modules in another. A radar aperture line revived in a third. Final assembly, naturally, where the delegation was senior and the election map mattered. When appropriators asked what cancellation would mean, staff pulled up a jobs map that looked like a spiderweb over swing states. Defunding didn't mean closing a plant. It meant lighting a fuse. Meanwhile, the contractor's government affairs team laid carpet tracks across Capitol Hill. Breakfast briefings with glossy handouts. Factory tour where members signed bulkheads and posed with apprentices. Think tank papers appeared with familiar phrases: critical capability, strategic overmatch, peer competition. The op-eds read like doctrine with flag pins. None of it lied outright. It just omitted the parts that made the miracle look tired. Inside the Navy's program office, survival felt more practical. They needed budgets on time, requirements stabilized, and a way to frame delays without triggering a reset. The revolving door hovered in the background, not as a scheme, but as a norm. A colonel on terminal leave took a consulting slot. A deputy PM accepted a board seat 2 years later. Everyone said the same thing: I'll keep serving, just from the outside. Incentives aligned themselves. There was one phrase that showed up whenever risk crept into a meeting: sunk costs, the shield. If you cancel now, you waste everything already paid. The tooling, the training, the supply chain, gone. The smarter version added a twist: we've crossed the valley of death. The payoff is just ahead. It reframed past mistakes as a down payment. It asked people to ignore the horizon and focus on the hill. Impact came quickly. Budgets stabilized even as performance slipped because the program had become a fixture. It lived in multiple line items: research here, procurement there, sustainment elsewhere. Cutting it cleanly would require a map and courage nobody had in the same room on the same day. And each fiscal year created a new cohort of stakeholders who'd fought to keep the line alive. Careers invested, offices invested. That's how iron hardens. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the shadows of classification. Alternate analyses, Red team memos, survivability annexes, circulated in red rooms. They didn't use headline language. They talked about risk management, contested environments, degraded kills chains. The conclusion was simple. The ship needed protection it couldn't provide itself. But those documents couldn't be waved on camera. So public talking points stayed clean, and the private plans layered in escorts and deception. Contractors didn't rely on faith. They built dependency. Proprietary interfaces ensured that upgrades flowed best through the original vendor. Data rights lived in license agreements that made competition a slogan unless you paid to unlock your own ship's information. When a congressional staffer asked why no one else could bid on a subcomponent, the answer was security and integration risk. It sounded responsible. It also locked the door from the inside. Microstory. A mid-level aide new to the defense portfolio took a tour at a coastal yard. She shook hands with welders whose kids' photos were taped inside lockers. The foreman explained how a pause would mean losing certified workers to commercial yards, how getting them back would take years. On the bus ride back, she scrolled through the memo about not survivable under modern targeting. Both facts were true. Her boss voted to fund the next tranche. The playbook matured. Step 1, rename. The baseline became Block 2, then Spiral 3.1, something that sounded like progress. Step 2, rebaseline, reset cost and schedule targets so you could hit them. Step 3, rebrand, shift the mission from shore bombardment to sea control, then to host platform for future effects. Each change wrapped the same hull in new words and bought a few more quarters. Impact rippled outward. Competing projects, distributed sensors, unmanned swarms lost their edge in budget scrum because they didn't have zip codes attached. The iron triangle rewarded mass that could vote. The future, ironically, had fewer lobbyists. Every dollar shielded the legacy made the alternative less likely to arrive on time. The Navy's modernization plan began to look like a museum with fresh paint. This was the moment everything hardened, not because the ship got better, but because the story got thicker. The contractor's pipeline, the Hills districts, the Navy's timelines, each strand depended on the others to stand. Pull one and you risked all three. That's how a program becomes policy, and policy becomes identity. Meanwhile, beyond the Potomac, a different kind of threat was taking shape, one that didn't care about narratives or jobs maps, only signatures and range. The battlefield moves under their feet. 3 years after the christening, a classified brief landed on a secure table with a simple map and a brutal thesis. Red rings bloomed off hostile coastlines. Concentric bands labeled with missile names sailors knew too well. The space where big ships could operate without constant, layered protection had shrunk like a tide going out. Precision didn't just live ashore anymore. It lived on mobile launchers, on road networks, under camouflage nets, plugged into satellites that saw wakes and heat and habits. Stakes couldn't be abstract. A destroyer wasn't a spreadsheet. It was 1,000 people and $1 billion target. If those rings were right, bringing the miracle ship close enough to use the guns it was built around carried an unacceptable risk. Commanders felt the trap closing. Either hold the ship back and admit its core mission had evaporated, or push it forward and gamble lives against missiles that cost less than a lifeboat. Action moved fast outside our control. Adversaries knit space, cyber, and sea into a kill chain that worked on volume and speed. Commercial satellites provided persistence. Passive sensors sniffed emissions. Long-range anti-ship missiles didn't need to be perfect. They needed to be cheap enough to launch in salvos. Meanwhile, swarms of small drones made every radar look busy, drowning algorithms in false choices. The fancy slide that promised seamless fusion now faced noise designed to look like truth. Impact was immediate for planners. Routes adjusted. Operating areas shifted outward. The ship that was supposed to hug the shoreline for land attack found itself living beyond the threat rings, dependent on escorts and air cover to survive, much less fight. The ocean got smaller, and with it, the window where a prestige platform could earn its keep. That wasn't a theory inside a think tank. It was a daily restriction line in the operations log. While that was happening in the Western Pacific, another brief out of the Gulf laid out a parallel lesson. Cheap, mobile anti-ship missiles tucked into fishing ports, UAVs flown from parking lots, false targets flicked on and off to bait fire control systems. The cost curve bent hard against anything large and exquisite. What nobody said aloud, because the microphones were on, was simple. We debuilt a ship to dominate shorelines, just as shorelines learned to kill ships. Back at the fleet level, the conversation turned from tactics to design. Survivability wasn't just armor and angles, it was signature discipline across the stack. Radar, infrared, acoustic, even the way a data link chatted. The miracle ship had stealth, yes, but its emissions profile under real operations wasn't a ghost. It was a pattern, and patterns get found. Sailors learn to go dark, to hold transmissions, to accept that a silent ship can't command as cleanly. Every knob turned down shaved effectiveness. A micro story brought it home. On a night transit, the tower watched a mosaic of tracks bloom, some real, some decays, just as the ship crossed the outer edge of a known threat ring. A comms hold was in effect. The fusion engine lagged. A junior officer, eyes on the drone feed, asked for authority to light a specific radar mode. The captain paused, counted cost in milliseconds and signature, then said no. They slid past in the dark, intact but blind, and the wardroom chewed that decision for weeks. Meanwhile, budgets didn't move like missiles. The line item stayed fat even as the mission evaporated. The logic bent itself into new shapes. Sea control, distributed lethality, future effects. The hull would be a host for missiles we hadn't fielded yet, for sensors still in briefings. It wasn't wrong to evolve, it was necessary. But the timing was cruel. The world had already pivoted to precision saturation while we were still rewriting the brochure. What nobody knew at the time, outside closed briefings, was how much the adversary's training had adapted. They rehearsed punching holes in our air defense picture with combinations of jammers and low flyers. They mapped our replenishment points and built plans around denying gas and ammo, not just scoring kills. A prestige platform that depended on bespoke support turned out to be as vulnerable at the pier as it was at sea. Interrupt the tail, and the teeth dull themselves. Stakes grew heavier as allies watched. Our credibility had always been tied to presence, and presence meant ships in places that now punished ships for showing up. When regional crises squeezed decision windows, we discovered a quiet constraint. We couldn't risk the hull close enough to matter without a full package, and the package took time. Rivals noticed. They ran plays inside our logistics loop and called it strategy. This was the moment everything tilted. The battlefield had moved, and our miracle, engineered for a shoreline artillery duel that belonged to yesterday, found itself outranged, outpaced, and overexposed. The budget line didn't care, the physics did. Under the weight of new missiles and cheap eyes in the sky, the ocean stopped being a sanctuary for icons and started rewarding things that could scatter, hide, and be replaced.